So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce Tom Tutty, who's the Finance Director for Glencar Construction. Tom, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Roland. Nice to meet you.
No, absolutely. Do you mind giving me a bit of just a quick introduction on yourself and Glencar?
Yeah, no problem. So, as mentioned, now I'm the head of finance at Glencar Construction, and we are a construction company specialising in industrial and logistics sectors. And we were formed in 2016 and have grown pretty rapidly since then. Sort of from turnover of 700,000 in the first year, right up to, in our latest accounts, 150 million pounds in the last 5 years or so. So it's
phenomenal.
It's been an exciting growth.
Brilliant. And obviously, the huge achievement last year, and that's why it's great to have you on. Is obviously getting top spot in the Sunday Times fastest list of fastest growing privately owned companies, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. That was a fantastic achievement. We're all delighted with that. I mean, it's. Not only was it the fastest or the best growth of that year, it was the fastest in the history of the competition, going back to, I think, the 1970s.
Wow, that is amazing. I have
to really
say,
quite something, and really sort of underpins the work that everyone's been doing here. And,
well, I know Eddie McGillicuddy, the MD, from outside of work, and you never see him really. He's just working all the time now. So
unfortunately, I see too much of him. But
well, good to have you on board. To be fair, I'm glad he hasn't got you doing quite the same hours. But I'm interested to get into that list and the performance over the last 12 months. I mean, what sort of things did the business have to do to sort of get there?
Yeah, so I mean, the real growth journey has been born out of our client relationships, and most of the growth that is underpinned in that award is growth that happened pre-COVID, if you remember pre-COVID. So that was with growth of some real key clients such as Ocado and sort of Big Yellow Self-Storage and clients like that. And Ocado is obviously a great sort of case study in that they come on leaps and bounds over the last 5-10 years, and sort of we managed to win some key schemes for them and grow alongside it. But we've really grown our client base with sort of blue chip customers all the way down to sort of well-established SMEs, and the whole focus is deliver for the customer and do the best in class sort of construction services that we believe we can do, and win repeat work with our client base.
Yeah. So look, I guess then over the 2020 has been good to Glencar, and a lot of businesses have struggled this year.
Yeah.
What have been the challenges because of COVID? There must have still been some.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So I mean, obviously back in March, April of 2020, the main challenge was just working out what COVID was and what the impacts were going to be on our business. There were a good 3-4 week period there where every day sitting down watching the press conferences, finding out if construction sites are going to be allowed to stay open or if they're going to close, and then not only what the rules were, but you have to start looking sort of introspectively about whether you should stay open and whether you can keep your sites open and whether you can make sure your employees and the supply chain are all safe. Fortunately for us, because we work in sort of industrial warehousing, we work on quite big sites. They're large sheds, we like to call them, and that enables you to socially distance at work relatively easily. And there was a lot of COVID compliance we had to bring in, but it meant that we could keep open the majority of our sites. I think we shut 1 or 2 sites for a short amount of time, but we managed to keep some operation going the whole time, which meant, in terms on the finance side, in terms of cash flow and those areas where businesses struggled, we were okay because we could keep the money coming in, which is the key. It's where work dries up, the money coming in dries up, but the money going out doesn't. That's when you get into trouble. Sounds obvious, but yeah.
So, absolutely. So good. And did from a obviously you've got the shed, the big space, so that helps with your social distancing. Look, I don't know the financing situation for Glencar and stuff, but did the business have to do anything financially to really change the way it was working then, or not really?
Not particularly, no. I mean, we took steps where steps were made available to us, and it was sort of financially prudent. For example, deferring tax bills where it's interest free, just because back at that first stage, as I said, you've got no idea how it was going to pan out. Even at the time, the cash flow was all well and good. No one knew how COVID what was going to happen in the next few months. So we availed of some of those schemes that were open to us, but generally speaking, and it is sort of not the, it's nice for us, but it's not the story with a lot of companies. It was business as usual for a lot of the year, and if anything, business better than it had been the year before. I mean, a lot of our clients in sort of logistics and warehousing, the demand for their services has shot up as a result of COVID and Brexit. So, you know, demand's increasing, and it's all good for
you've been the beneficiary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, do you know what? It's funny. I also, you know, we speak to a lot of different companies who've had challenges. You know, and it is good to hear businesses that have still done well, and you know, I guess it gives everyone hope that the world is still moving in some places, and everyone else will get back to that at some point. So
absolutely. And I get on the sort of another benefit of, well, not a benefit of COVID, that sounds the wrong thing to say, but a side effect of it is that pre-COVID, we won the contract to build the Vaccine Manufacturing and Innovation Centre in Harwell in Oxfordshire. And obviously, as a result of a global pandemic, that scheme was fast-tracked. And yeah, and that's been, you know, it's stories like that have played into our hands a bit in this year. And sort of we've just positioned ourselves in the perfect spot to deal with both Brexit and the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, brilliant. No, good to hear. Good to hear. And has the business done much from a technology point of view? I think a lot of companies during COVID, you know, because to be fair, they've been a bit quieter. You know, they've had a chance to perhaps, you know, drive forward some of their technological advances, and that's been a lot of trend that people have seen. As I guess you might have been too busy to do it, have you?
Well, again, there's part of that, and there's part of, because of the growth story and the relative young age of the company, we probably needed to invest in those areas regardless of whether we had a lot of time to do it or not. So obviously, speaking about the finance department, I came on board at Glencar in 2019, and that was the first year we brought all our accounting in-house. So the first sort of year or so of that was just making sure that we had all the processes in place to do that effectively, and then to look to improve our processes and think, what can we actually bring in to add more value into the business, rather than just looking at the results and saying, this is what happened, what can we do to analyze cost and you know, really add that extra level. So the finance department, we've been undergoing investment into new technologies and softwares to help make that next step, and in areas sort of like HR and IT security is another big one as well. We're investing quite a lot of money at the minute to make sure that our processes are in line with the size of company we now are, because that's the easy thing to sort of lose track on in those first few years when you're growing really fast. Everything's money in, money out, but you need to make sure the back office is can keep up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. As other businesses now start to come out of COVID and we start to see growth, and it starts to challenge the cash position a bit, as they're maybe using their cash, and you know, there's that delay in the sales, as it were. You know, what advice would you give in how to manage the cash and you know, in a growth, you know, you've obviously been in the growth curve. So, you know, what advice would you give to these businesses in terms of when they start to come out of COVID now? How do they look after the business as they do it?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things I do is I constantly, every day, I have a running cash flow forecast for the next 30, 60 days up to a year, and sort of differs in detail between those. And I'm updating those all the time and making sure that, you know, you can see any potential, you know, cash shortfalls or pitfalls coming from a lot as far off as possible, and then keeping constant dialogue with, you know, the bank and key stakeholders, and making sure that, you know, basically you can solve the problems before they become a problem. That's really the best way of doing it. I know it's easier said than done, but it's really just all comes down to forecasting and making sure you have all the information available to you that you need, I think.
Yeah, well, that's good advice for everyone. Hopefully I'll take a positive view at the end of this and say that's where people need to be as we start to come out of this and start to grow again. So Tom, that's brilliant. And look, thanks very much for joining me today. I wish Glencar all the best in terms of carrying on the growth and setting the benchmark for that Sunday Times list. And hopefully we'll see you there next year as well.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Nice to see you, Tom. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.